Shadows of Justice. It was a sweltering July morning in 1998 when the old oak doors of the Grayson County Courthouse creaked open in the sleepy city of Talbridge, Alabama. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight piercing the high windows, casting a golden haze over the worn wooden benches. A murmur rippled through the packed gallery as Lena Carver, a tall woman with skin like polished ebony and eyes that held a quiet storm, stepped into the defendant's box. She wore a sharp burgundy blazer, her presence commanding despite the handcuffs that had only recently been removed from her wrists. Across the room, two uniformed officers, Jack Hensley and Roy Ballard, lounged at the prosecution's table. Their lips curled into faint, mocking grins. They thought they had her cornered. A nobody daring to defy their iron grip on this town. They were wrong. The air in Talbridge that summer was thick, not just with humidity, but with whispers. For weeks, the local paper, the Talbridge Sentinel, had spun this as a cut-and-dry case. A woman obstructing a police raid. A nuisance to be swatted down. But as the crowd swelled, farmers in faded overalls, church ladies clutching hymnals, and reporters with pens poised, the atmosphere hinted at something bigger. Something unspoken simmered beneath the surface. A current no one could name but everyone could feel. Lena stood straight, her gaze sweeping the room like a lighthouse beam cutting through fog. Beside her was her attorney, Walter Grayson, a wiry man in his 60s with a shock of white hair and a voice that carried the gravelly weight of decades spent fighting lost causes. His assistant, a young woman named Clara, hovered nearby, her clipboard a shield against the chaos. No fanfare heralded Lena's arrival, just the steady click of her heels on the oak floor. A sound that seemed to echo louder than it should. At the prosecution's table, Hensley, a barrel-chested man with a perpetual squint, nudged Ballard, a leaner figure whose sharp features betrayed a restless energy. "She's toast," Hensley muttered, his smirk widening. "Gonna enjoy watching her crash and burn," Ballard replied, cracking his knuckles. They'd built their reputations in Talbridge's poorer districts, black neighborhoods where their word was law. And complaints vanished into the ether. To them, Lena was just another name on a roster of broken spirits. Judge Evelyn Morrow took her seat, her silver hair pulled tight in a bun, her gavel a quiet promise of order. She adjusted her bifocals and peered at the docket, her face betraying nothing. The charge was simple on paper. Lena had interfered with a police operation 2 months prior. A late-night raid on a ramshackle house on Sycamore Street. The officers claimed she'd stormed in, shouting threats, forcing them to cuff her. But the details were murky, like a photograph left too long in the rain, and Lena's steady calm suggested a story they hadn't anticipated. The curtain rises. As the trial commenced, the room hushed, save for the faint hum of a ceiling fan battling the heat. Lena sat, hands folded, her face a mask of composure. Hensley and Ballard shot her glances dripping with disdain, blind to the storm brewing just beyond their reach. This wasn't just a courtroom, it was a stage. And the play about to unfold would rewrite Talbridge's history. Assistant District Attorney Margaret Tate delivered the prosecution's opening with a clipped, rehearsed cadence. She painted Lena as a reckless agitator, a woman who'd endangered officers in the line of duty. Hensley nodded like a preacher hearing an amen. Ballard's eyes gleamed with smug certainty. Lena watched the jury, a mix of shopkeepers, teachers, and retirees, searching for flickers of doubt. She saw it in a few, a furrowed brow, a hesitant glance. She'd spent enough years reading rooms to know where the cracks lay. Walter rose next, his voice a slow drawl that belied its steel. "You've heard one side," he said, pacing before the jury, a tale of a woman disrupting the peace. "But I ask you to listen closer. What if Officers Hensley and Ballard overstepped? What if they targeted Miss Carver for reasons that ain't got nothing to do with justice?" Hensley's grin twitched, Ballard's fingers stilled. Walter's words hung like smoke, curling into the jury's thoughts. After statements, Judge Morrow called a recess. The officers swaggered to a corner, Hensley tossing a taunt Lena's way. A hissed, "Good luck," that didn't reach her ears but reached her resolve. She met Walter's gaze instead, her voice low. "They think I'm nothing," she said. "Let's keep it that way a while longer." Walter smirked, adjusting his tie. "Patience, Lena. They'll dig their own graves." Outside, The courthouse steps buzzed. Reporters scribbled. Onlookers speculated. Who was this woman? Unruffled by the weight of the law? Clara fended off questions as Lena sipped water from a paper cup. Her mind racing. This wasn't about her pride. It was about the rot festering in Talbridge's police ranks. A rot she'd sworn to uproot. The truth takes shape. Back in session, Walter unveiled the first piece of the puzzle. Grainy footage from a convenience store camera across from Sycamore Street. The screen flickered to life, showing a humid dusk, patrol cars clogging the narrow road. Lena appeared, in a simple sundress, approaching the officers. Her gestures were measured, questioning. Hensley waved her off. Ballard stepped closer, his stance aggressive. Then, in a blur, Ballard yanked her arm, slamming her against a car as Hensley loomed. The crowd gasped. No chaos, no threats, just a woman cornered. Walter froze the frame. Does this look like obstruction? He asked, voice cutting through the silence. Or does it look like a citizen asking why her neighbor's door got kicked in? Margaret Tate shifted, ready to object, but Walter barreled on. We've got witnesses who'll tell you what she said. Concern, not confrontation. First up was Bessie Tate, a wiry grandmother who'd watched from her porch. Lena asked what was happening. Bessie said, her voice quavering but firm. That house belongs to old Miss Ellie, who'd been hassled by police before. They didn't like her questions, called her names I won't say here. Hensley's jaw clenched. Ballard's eyes darted. Margaret tried to poke holes. Bessie's age, her distance, but the old woman snapped. I see fine, and I know what I heard. The room buzzed with unease. Racial slurs, muttered under breath, hinted at a deeper ugliness. Lena felt the jury's eyes on her, weighing her silence against the office's bluster. The game changes. By midday, whispers spread beyond the courthouse. Talbridge's black community had long known Hensley and Ballard's heavy hands. Now, others were listening. In a cramped office, Lena and Walter plotted. They're rattled, Walter said, but we need more than Bessie. Your title's the Hammer. Lena nodded, her voice steel. Not yet. Let them bury themselves first. She thought of her real role, director of the National Security Bureau. A position she'd earned through grit and a vow to protect the powerless. Here, ironically, she was the powerless, fighting the same battles she'd risen to end. Clara slipped her a phone. Deputy Secretary Hargrove checking in. Soon, Lena murmured, this is bigger than me. Across the hall, Hensley and Ballard fumed with Margaret. She's lying. Ballard spat. We've got no video, cams were down. Margaret's eyes narrowed. That excuse won't hold. Find a story that sticks. Hensley grinned, unrepentant. No one's buying her over us. The collapse. Day 3 brought Ballard to the stand. His bravado fraying. He claimed Lena had shoved him. Screamed threats. Walter pounced. Where's that shove in the tape? Ballard stammered. Off camera. The jury smirked. Hensley followed, spinning a tale of federal revenge, threats, closer to truth than he knew. Their bodycam excuses, dead batteries, glitches, crumbled under Walter's grilling. By the 4th day, the courthouse was a circus. Crowds chanted outside. Newsvans lined the square. Lena took the stand, her voice clear as a bell. I'm from Georgia, raised where police could break you for looking wrong. I joined the FBI, then the NSB. To stop that. Now, I'm director. The room froze. Hensley paled. Ballard gaped. I didn't obstruct, she said. I questioned a raid that stank of abuse. That's my job. Chaos erupted. The office's mocking crumbled into dread. They'd cuffed a federal titan. Reckoning and renewal. The verdict came fast. Guilty of false arrest. False reports. Hensley and Ballard slumped as Judge Morrow ordered custody pending sentencing. Outside, Talbridge exhaled. Some cheered. Some wept. Lena stood with Walter, accepting thanks from allies like Pastor Amos and columnist Jane Hargrove, who'd seen the light. The city shifted. The Talbridge PD faced federal probes. Led by Lena's team, reforms bloomed. The old guard fell. One night, Lena returned to Sycamore Street. Kids laughed. Miss Ellie hugged her. Murals of hope sprouted on cracked walls. The fight wasn't over, but the spark was lit. In her car, staring at the stars, Lena smiled. Justice was a long road, but she'd keep driving. A dawn unfinished. The verdict hung in the air like the final note of a hymn. Resonant and unshakable. as Hensley and Ballard were led away, their badges now relics of a tarnished past. The courthouse seemed to exhale, a collective release of years held tight in silence. Outside, the Talbridge night was alive with sound, the hum of crickets, the distant shouts of celebration, and the soft clatter of news vans packing up their stories. Lena stood on the courthouse steps, the humid breeze tugging at her burgundy blazer, her eyes tracing the silhouettes of a city caught between its shadows and its redemption. Pastor Amos approached, his weathered hands clasped in gratitude. "You've given us a spark, Miss Carver," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Ain't nobody thought we'd see this day." Beside him, Jane Hargrove, her notebook tucked away, offered a nod, not the handshake of a convert, but the quiet respect of someone who'd glimpsed a truth she couldn't unsee. Lena smiled faintly, her heart heavy with the weight of their thanks. This wasn't her victory alone, it belonged to every soul who'd whispered prayers against the dark. Every voice drowned by the clatter of power unchallenged. Back on Sycamore Street, the air felt lighter. Miss Ellie stood at her gate, tears carving trails down her cheeks as she gripped Lena's hand. Children darted past, their laughter a fragile melody against the scars of cracked pavement. New murals bloomed on weathered walls, hands clasped, faces lifted toward a sky no longer out of reach. Talbridge was stirring, its pulse quickening with the promise of change. The police department faced its reckoning, federal eyes peeling back layers of rot, while Lena's quiet resolve fueled reforms that reached beyond these streets. Later, in the stillness of her car, Lena let the night settle around her. The dashboard clock blinked 11:47 p.m., its green glow a reminder of time's relentless march. She thought of Georgia, of the girl who'd once watched sheriffs swagger past her father's church, their authority a wall she'd vowed to dismantle. Now, as director of the National Security Bureau, she held a torch she'd never meant to wield alone. Talbridge had been a mirror, reflecting not just her fight, but a nation's, a world's, unseen wounds. She didn't start the engine yet. Instead, she leaned back, gazing at the stars pricking through the Alabama sky. The road ahead stretched long and uncharted, paved with battles yet to come. Hensley and Ballard were just the beginning. The real war lay in the systems that bred them, in the silences that shielded them. But tonight, there was a flicker, a crack in the wall, a breath of possibility. Lena's lips curved into a determined smile, not of triumph, but of purpose. Justice wasn't a destination, it was a journey. And she'd walk it, one step, one street, one soul at a time, until the shadows gave way to dawn.